Margaret Hollis inherited a pharmacy worth $3,847.22. Her brother took the house on Elm Street, the savings account, and 38 years of their father's name. She got the building on Cumberland Avenue, closed, condemned. A sign her father had painted by hand in 1971. She drove 4 hours alone, unlocked the door herself. With rubber gloves and a mop she bought at a gas station off Route 119. What she found behind that last shelf had been there for 23 years, and her father had made sure only one person would ever be able to understand what it meant. At 61, after 34 years behind a pharmacy counter in a town that had been losing people since the mines closed, Margaret Hollis accepted $3,847.22 and a set of keys that no longer opened anything worth opening. The building on Cumberland Avenue had been her father's since 1971. Raymond Hollis had bought it the year Margaret started first grade, the same year the last deep mine in Harlan County cut its workforce by half. He had painted the sign himself. He had mixed the paint in the back room and climbed a ladder on a Saturday morning while Margaret held the base, and her mother called up from the sidewalk that it was crooked. It was not crooked. It was the straightest thing on that block for the next 50 years. Derek had found the comparable sales on his phone in under 4 minutes. He had laid them out on Margaret's kitchen table the Tuesday before Thanksgiving.
Plot right here is
3
the only
printouts
one that
from
matters.
Zillow, and 1 from a county assessor's database he had accessed through his real estate license. He was 37 years old. He had his father's jaw and his grandfather's name, and almost none of either man's patience for things that could not be converted into a number. "The structural report says the foundation has shifted," he said. He did not look up from the printouts. Deferred maintenance going back at least 15 years. The HVAC is original to the building. The electrical hasn't been touched since the 90s. Margaret looked at the papers. "The assessed value is $3,800, Derek said. The remediation costs alone would run $60,000 to $80,000. Even if you put the money in, there's no market for retail pharmacy space in Harlan right now. There hasn't been for a decade." He said it the way he said most things, not unkindly, but completely. The way a doctor reads a chart to a patient who has already decided they don't want to hear the diagnosis.
This is where we started.
He believed in the math. He had believed in the math his entire adult life, because the math had never once let him down the way people had. Margaret picked up one of the printouts. She read it. "Your grandfather built that counter himself," she said. Derek was quiet for a moment. "I know that. He built the shelving, too, the back shelves. The wood came from a farm out on 421. He drove out there with Earl Webb on a Saturday, and they loaded it into Earl's truck." She set the printout down. "Earl Webb has been dead 11 years. Derek looked at her then. There was something in his face that was not cruelty and not indifference. It was something more careful than either of those things. He was a man who had learned very early that sentiment was a form of financial illiteracy, and he had learned it because he had watched sentiment cost people things they could not get back. He had watched it cost his own mother in ways he had never been able to say out loud. "Mom," he said, "the math doesn't care about the counter." Margaret looked at her hands. She had spent 34 years measuring things in micrograms, compounds that could heal at one dose and harm at another, separated by a margin thinner than a human hair. She had learned in pharmacy school that precision required stillness. She had learned behind that counter that stillness was not the same as acceptance. She picked up the pen. She signed where the notary pointed. 3 lines. Her signature was the same on all 3, the same forward lean, the same hard stop at the end of the S. 34 years of signing her name to things that mattered and things that didn't had made her signature consistent in a way most people's weren't. She had not been able to control much. She had been able to control that. Derek gathered the papers. He said he would handle the transfer filing. He said he knew a contractor in Lexington who did remediation work and might be interested in the structure. He said she should not have to deal with any of it. Margaret said that was fine. After he left, she sat at the kitchen table for a while. She did not call anyone. She did not turn on the television. She looked at the copy of the deed transfer the notary had left for her, and she thought about the sign her father had painted in 1971, and the ladder she had held at the base, and her mother calling up from the sidewalk. Then she got up and went to the closet and found the rubber gloves she used for cleaning. She put them in a bag. She put a mop in the bag. She found her thermos on the second shelf of the pantry, behind the rice, and she filled it with coffee and put the lid on and set it by the door. She went to bed. In the morning, she would drive 4 hours south on 119.
Do you know where the main
and she would
road
unlock
is?
the door of a building that was no longer hers, and she would clean it before the contractor came. That was the only thing left she could do for it. She was going to do it. She left at 5:47 in the morning. The interstate was empty that early. She drove south out of Lexington on 75 and picked up 119 at Corbin, and the road changed there the way it always did. Narrower, steeper, the hills closing in on both sides, and the trees coming right to the edge of the asphalt in places where the guardrail had been taken out and never replaced. She had driven this road more times than she could count. She had driven it in her father's truck the summer she turned 16, learning the curves. She had driven it back from Lexington after graduation with her license in her bag and her father waiting at the building on Cumberland Avenue with 2 cups of coffee and nothing else to say except that he was glad she was home. She had not driven it in 4 years. The thermos was on the passenger seat. She had filled it before she left, and she drank from it at Corbin and again somewhere past Pineville, where the road curved hard to the left and the creek appeared below the hillside, gray-green in the early light. The coffee was good. She had made it strong. She stopped once at a gas station outside Baxter, the kind of station that had been there since the 80s and had not changed much, except the pumps. A handwritten sign in the window advertised boiled peanuts and live bait. She went inside to use the restroom, and when she came out, a young man behind the counter was looking at her keys on the counter where she had set them. "Hollis Pharmacy," he said. He was reading the tag on the keychain. It was a small plastic rectangle her father had ordered from a catalog sometime in the 90s. White letters on a blue background. Raymond Hollis had put his name on everything. Not from pride, from precision. He believed things should be labeled correctly. The young man looked up. He was maybe 25. He had the kind of face that had been outdoors most of its life. "You know it?" Margaret said. "My grandmother did." He was already turning back to the coffee machine behind him. Said Mr. Hollis was good to her. Said he was real good to a lot of people. He set a cup on the counter. He had already started pouring. "You want this?" Margaret looked at the cup. "I have a thermos," she said. "I know." He put the pot back. "You want this anyway." She took it. She left $2 on the counter. He did not look up again, and she did not say anything else. And she drove the last 40 minutes into Harlan with the gas station cup in the cup holder, and the thermos still warm on the passenger seat. Cumberland Avenue was quiet at 9:14 in the morning. It had always been quiet. That was one of the things she remembered about working there as a girl. The The street had a particular stillness to it, even when it was busy. The kind of stillness that comes from a place that has been doing the same thing for a long time and has stopped needing to announce itself. There had been a hardware store 2 doors down, and a diner across the street, and a barber shop on the corner that had closed in the late 90s. Most of those were gone now. A cell phone repair shop had taken the hardware store space. The diner was a church now, a small congregation that met on Sundays and Wednesday evenings. The sign out front changed by hand each week. The pharmacy building stood between an empty lot and an insurance office that had moved in sometime after she stopped coming back regularly. The sign her father had painted was still there. The white letters had gone the color of old cream, and the blue background had faded to something closer to gray. But the letters were still straight, and the name was still legible. Hollis Pharmacy, established 1971. She sat in the car for a moment. Then she got out. The lock on the front door was stiff. She had to work the key twice before it turned, and when it did, the door swung inward with a sound that was half groan and half something else, a settling, the way old buildings speak when they have been closed up for too long and are surprised to feel air moving through them again. She pushed it the rest of the way open and stepped inside. The smell hit her before her eyes adjusted. Dust, old wood, something underneath that, faint, almost gone, but still there if you knew what you were looking for. The specific, clean smell of a working pharmacy. Ethanol and paper, and the faint mineral trace of compounds she had made herself at that counter 10, 15, 20 years ago. It was mostly memory, but it was there. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she went back to the car and got the bag. She started at the front. The display shelving along the right wall had been cleared out when the chain came through and bought the inventory. But the shelves themselves were still there, her grandfather's work. The wood her father and Earl Webb had hauled down from the farm on 4/21 on a Saturday 40 years ago. She wiped them down from the top, working shelf by shelf, the dust coming off in gray sheets onto the cloth. Some of it was thick enough that it had texture. 23 years of closed-up building settling into wood grain. She worked for an hour on the front shelving alone. Then she moved to the counter. The counter was oak. Her grandfather had built it in the early 70s from plans he had drawn himself on graph paper, and it had outlasted 3 sets of counter stools, 2 register systems, and 1 flood that had taken out the floor in the back storage room in 1987. Margaret had been 23 in 1987.
Webb.
She had bailed water with her father for 6 hours before they got ahead of it. She ran her hand along the edge of the counter. The wood was dry but sound. Under the dust it was still smooth. Her grandfather had sanded it by hand. She could feel where the grain ran. She cleaned the counter. She cleaned the glass of the front display case, which still had its original hardware, small brass poles that her father had polished every Saturday morning without exception. She cleaned the register shelf, which was empty now, and the small corner where her father had kept a jar of peppermints for children who came in with their parents and stood very still and were very patient. The jar was still there. It was empty, but it was still there. She found the problem at 11:30. The back storage room had a water issue. She had known about it from the structural report Derek had shown her. Foundation shift, moisture intrusion along the north wall. But the report had been clinical about it, numbers and percentages, and the reality was different from the numbers. The north wall had been wet long enough that the dry wall had come away from the studs in 2 places and the baseboard had warped off the floor. There was a smell back there that was not the pharmacy smell. It was darker than that. She stood in the doorway of the storage room for a long time.
I have been standing in this very
The
room
mop
for a
was not going to
long
fix
time.
this. The rubber gloves were not going to fix this. This was the kind of damage that required professionals and equipment and money. She had already decided she was not going to spend on a building she no longer owned. She was here to clean. She had come 4 hours to clean a building before the contractor came, because it was the only thing she had left to give it. And the back wall was telling her that some things were past the point where cleaning was enough. She turned around. She went back to the front of the building. She filled her bucket from the utility sink behind the counter, which still had water pressure, and she kept working. She worked through lunch. She had not brought food, and she did not stop. By early afternoon, she had finished the front room and the counter area and had started on the floor, working in sections from the front door toward the back. The linoleum was original to a renovation in the early 90s, a pale gray with a faint blue grid pattern that her father had chosen because it was easy to keep clean and showed when something had been dropped. She had swept up enough dust to fill a grocery bag. She was on her second bucket of water. She was on her knees, working a section near the prescription pickup window, when she heard the door. She looked up. A woman was standing in the doorway. She was in her mid-70s, broad-shouldered, wearing a house dress and canvas shoes, and an expression that was not exactly surprised. More like confirmation. Like she had been waiting for this and was not entirely shocked to see it happening. "I saw your car," the woman said. Margaret got up off her knees. "Cora Webb," the woman said. She said it the way people in small towns say their own names to strangers, fully, without abbreviation, because the whole name carries information the first name alone doesn't. "I've got the grocery across the street. Had it 37 years. She looked around the front room, at the shelving, at the counter, at the bucket and the mop. "You're Raymond's girl." "Margaret," Margaret said. Cora nodded like this was something she already knew. She stepped fully inside, letting the door close behind her, and walked to the center of the room and stood there, looking at the counter the way people look at things they have been looking at for so long they stopped seeing them and are now, for some reason, seeing them again. "He used to open at 7, Cora said. "Every day but Sunday. I'd see the lights come on from across the street. First thing every morning for 38 years I'd see those lights." She paused. "When the chain came through and closed it up, I kept looking for the lights anyway. Took me about a year to stop." Margaret looked at the counter. "I didn't know he'd died until the lights stopped," Cora said. "That's how I found out. I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but that's how it was." She said it plainly, without apology, the way people in places like Harlan say true things, not to wound and not to comfort, but because the truth is the truth, and it has weight, and you carry it whether you say it out loud or not. "It doesn't sound terrible," Margaret said. Cora looked at her. Then she looked at the back of the building, toward the storage room, and something shifted in her expression. "You find the back room yet?" "Yes," Margaret said. "Water's been getting in since 2019. I called the county about it twice. They sent somebody out who looked at the outside foundation and wrote something down, and that was the last I heard." She reached into the pocket of her house dress and produced a set of keys. "I've got a shop vac, and I've got a dehumidifier I used when my own basement flooded 3 years back. You want them? They're yours." Margaret looked at the keys. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't," Cora said. She was already moving toward the door. "I'll be back in 10 minutes." She left. The door swung closed behind her. Margaret listened to the sound of it settling, and then she picked up the mop and went back to work. Cora came back in 8 minutes. She brought the shop vac and the dehumidifier and a folding table she said was easier to work off than the floor, and she stayed for the rest of the afternoon. She did not ask questions. She did not explain herself further. She worked the shop vac along the north wall while Margaret finished the floor, and when the suction pulled something loose from behind the baseboard and made a sound like a small animal startled from sleep, Cora just repositioned the nozzle and kept going. They worked until the light through the front windows changed from afternoon to early evening. At some point, Cora went back across the street and came back with 2 sandwiches from a cooler she kept behind the counter of her store. Ham on white bread, wrapped in wax paper the old way. She set one on the folding table without comment and ate the other standing up, looking at the shelving. "He never charged the Simmons family," she said after a while. "Whole time he was open. Bobby Simmons worked the mines until his lungs gave out, and after that they didn't have insurance for anything. Raymond just never charged them. I know because Carol Simmons told me once, years after. Said she never knew how to bring it up with him, so she never did." Margaret looked at the sandwich on the table. "She wasn't the only one," Cora said. Then she went back to eating and didn't say anything more. Margaret unwrapped her sandwich. The ham was plain, and the bread was plain, and it was exactly what she needed, and she ate it standing at the counter where her father had stood for 38 years, and did not say anything either. By the time they finished with the north wall, the worst of the moisture damage had been contained. Not repaired, but contained. The dehumidifier was running, and the shop vac had pulled enough standing water out of the wall cavity that the smell had changed from mold to something drier, closer to the old building smell of the front room. It was not fixed, but it was better than it had been. Cora packed up her equipment at 6:30. She said she'd leave the dehumidifier running if Margaret wanted to come back tomorrow. Margaret said she would think about it. Cora said that was fine. She picked up the shop vac and carried it to the door, and then she stopped with her hand on the handle and looked back once at the prescription shelving along the left wall. The wall that ran from the counter all the way to the back of the building, shelf units, floor to ceiling, still loaded with the old wire dividers her father had used to organize compounds by patient name. She looked at it for a moment, something in her face that was not quite a question. Then she opened the door and left. Margaret stood in the empty building. The dehumidifier ran. Outside, Cumberland Avenue was settling into evening, the light going orange and then gray. The insurance office across the lot gone dark. The church, where the diner used to be, putting on its Wednesday night lights. She looked at the prescription shelving. She had been in this building for 9 hours. She had cleaned the front room and the counter and the floor and dealt with the north wall and eaten a sandwich and listened to Cora Webb describe the Simmons family in a way that had made her very still for a moment, and then not still at all. She had not looked at the prescription shelving. It ran the full length of the left wall, floor to ceiling, heavy units, bolted to the wall and to each other, loaded with those wire dividers and with the cardboard file boxes her father had used for the patient records he kept by hand. The chain had taken the medications and the equipment and the register. They had not taken the shelving. It was built into the wall in a way that would have required more effort than it was worth. What she found next wasn't what any of us expected. But standing in that building, in the last light, looking at those shelves, she already knew she wasn't finished. Something about the way Cora had looked at that wall before she left. Something about the way her father had bolted those units in. Not one set of brackets per unit, the way most people would have done it. 2 sets, double anchored. Like he had wanted to make sure they weren't going anywhere. Like he had wanted to make sure they were staying exactly where they were. She came back the next morning at 7. She had slept at the Harlan Motor Inn on the north side of town, a 2-story building that had been there since the 70s, and had the kind of room that was clean in the ways that mattered, and not trying to be anything it wasn't. She had eaten eggs at the diner next door and driven down Cumberland Avenue in the early light, and parked in the same spot she had parked the day before. The dehumidifier was still running. She could hear it through the door before she unlocked it. Inside, the air was different from yesterday, drier. The sharp edge of the moisture smell had pulled back from the front room entirely. She walked through to the back and checked the north wall. The dehumidifier reservoir was full. She emptied it into the utility sink and reset the unit and stood for a moment in the storage room doorway. Better. Not good, but better. She came back to the front and stood in front of the prescription shelving. It was 8 units total, running the full length of the left wall from the counter to the back of the building. Each unit was roughly 3 feet wide and 7 feet tall, built from the same oak as the counter, the same wood from the farm on 421. Her grandfather's work, her father's precision. The wire dividers were still in most of the units, labeled in her father's handwriting on strips of white tape. Patient surnames, alphabetical, A through W. The cardboard file boxes sat on the top shelves of the first 3 units, 6 boxes total, each one labeled by year in black marker. She looked at the double brackets. Every unit had them. 2 sets per unit, top and bottom, bolted through the drywall into the studs bit. She knew enough about construction from 30 years of owning property to know that 1 set was sufficient. Standard installation. You anchored the top, you anchored the bottom. The unit was stable. 2 sets meant something else. 2 sets meant someone had wanted these units to stay exactly where they were, regardless of what happened around them. She went to the first unit and tried to move it. It did not move. She tried the second. Same. She worked her way down the wall, testing each unit with both hands, shoulder height, pushing perpendicular to the wall. Nothing. They were anchored hard. Whatever was behind them was behind them completely. She stood back and looked at the wall. Then she looked at the file boxes on the top shelves. She pulled the step stool from behind the counter. Her father's step stool, wooden, 3 steps, the same one she had used as a girl to reach the top shelves, and she climbed up and started with the first box. It took her 2 hours to empty the shelving. She worked from top to bottom, unit by unit, carrying the file boxes to the folding table Cora had left and stacking them in order. The wire dividers she laid on the counter, the miscellaneous items from the lower shelves, a spare blood pressure cuff still in its case, 3 boxes of latex gloves, a reference binder from 1998, a ceramic mug with the University of Kentucky seal that she recognized as one her father had used every day for as long as she could remember. She carried to the counter as well. The mug still had a ring inside it from the last coffee he had poured. She set it down carefully. When the shelves were empty, she went back to the first unit and tried it again. Still nothing. She tried the second, the third, the fourth. On the 5th unit, something was different. Not much, a fraction. But when she pushed at shoulder height, she felt a give that the other units didn't have. Not a movement, but a resistance that was different in quality from the others. Not the resistance of a unit bolted hard to a stud. The resistance of a unit that was bolted to something that could, under the right conditions, move. She crouched down and looked at the bottom bracket. The screws were there. 4 of them. Standard Phillips head, painted over like the rest. But the paint around 2 of them was slightly different. Not cracked the way old paint cracks when it's been there for decades, but compressed. The kind of compression you get when something has been removed and replaced. Not recently, but not 40 years ago either. She stood up. She looked at the unit. She looked at the wall behind it. The drywall met the unit frame cleanly, the way it would if the unit had been built and the drywall installed after, or if the drywall had been installed to meet the unit specifically, to make the join look finished from the front. She put both hands on the unit frame at counter height. She did not push perpendicular this time. She pulled. The unit moved. Not far, 3 inches, but it moved, swinging out from the wall on the right side, the left side fixed, a pivot she had not seen because the left bracket was real and the right bracket was decorative, the screws going into the frame of the unit itself rather than through the wall. A door. The whole unit was a door. She pulled it the rest of the way. The opening was 30 inches wide. Beyond it was darkness and a set of stairs going down. She stood at the top and did not move for a moment. The air that came up from below was different from the building air, cooler by several degrees, and dry, the specific dry of a space that had been sealed rather than simply closed. And underneath the cool, underneath the dry, something else, faint, specific, ethanol, beeswax. And underneath both of those, so far back it was almost not there at all, peppermint, dried peppermint, the kind her father had kept in a jar on the counter for 38 years. She found the light switch on the right side of the door frame. She clicked it. The lights came on below, fluorescent. Old fixtures, the long tubes, 2 of them running the length of the ceiling of the room below. One of them flickered twice and steadied. The other came on clean and stayed. She went down. The stairs were 8 steps, concrete, poured, with a metal railing on the left side that her father had installed himself. She could tell by the brackets, the same style as the shelving brackets upstairs, the same hand. The walls of the stairwell were concrete block, unpainted, and the mortar between the blocks was tight and even. Someone had taken care with this. At the bottom, she stopped and looked. The room was approximately 20 feet by 15. The ceiling was low, 6.5 feet, maybe 7. The fluorescent fixtures mounted flush. The floor was concrete, sealed, and it was clean. Not recently cleaned, but clean in the way of a space that had been kept clean as a practice regularly over a long period of time. Along the left wall was a compounding bench. It was the length of the wall. Stainless steel surface, the kind used in professional lab work, with a backsplash and a built-in sink at the far end. The surface was bare, spotless. Above it, mounted to the wall, were the kinds of shelves used for lab storage. Wire mesh, adjustable, the supports the same industrial grade she recognized from the pharmaceutical suppliers her father had used. The shelves still held equipment, an analytical balance, the older mechanical kind with the glass enclosure, a set of graduated cylinders in a wooden rack, a mortar and pestle, ceramic, larger than the one he had kept upstairs. A row of amber glass bottles, empty, their labels blank. Along the right wall were filing cabinets, 4 of them, 2-drawer, metal, the industrial gray of government surplus. They were labeled on the front in her father's handwriting, the same white tape and black marker as the dividers upstairs. The labels said 1984 to 1990, 1991 to 1997, 1998 to 2004, 2005 to 2007. Against the far wall, under a workbench, was a lockbox. She saw it last because it was small. Metal, painted black, the size of a shoebox, sitting on the lower shelf of the workbench, with its hasp closed and a combination lock through the hasp. It was not hidden. It was just where it was, set there deliberately, in the place where someone would find it after they had seen everything else. She stood in the middle of the room. The fluorescent light was even and white. The analytical balance sat behind its glass enclosure and did not move. The mortar and pestle held the faint memory of something that had been ground in it. She could smell it if she stood close enough, the ghost of whatever compound had last been prepared on that bench. The amber bottles were clean inside. The filing cabinets were closed. She put her hand flat on the stainless steel surface of the compounding bench. Cold. The metal was cold, the way metal is cold when it has been in sealed air for a long time, a deeper cold than the room itself, a cold that comes from no sunlight ever, and no warmth except what the work itself generates. She thought about her father standing here. She did not know when he had built this room. She did not know how long it had been in operation, or when it had stopped, or how he had managed all of it above this room, the regular pharmacy, the customers, the chain buying him out, the lights going dark on Cumberland Avenue while Cora Webb watched from across the street. She looked at the filing cabinets. 1984 to 1990. That was before she came back from Lexington, before she stood beside him at the counter upstairs. The files in that cabinet went back to the year she was 20 years old and finishing her 2nd year of pharmacy school, not yet knowing she would come home. 1991 to 1997. Those were her years. She had been here for all of those. She had stood at the counter above this room for every one of those years, and she had not known this room existed. She pressed her hand flat against the cabinet drawer. Then she stepped back. She looked at the lockbox on the lower shelf of the workbench. It was small, black metal. The combination lock was a simple 3-dial type, the kind that could be found in any hardware store. The hasp was closed. The box was the kind made to protect documents from fire and moisture. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. She turned it in her hands. The bottom had been marked in her father's handwriting. Not tape this time, directly on the metal in permanent marker, the letters small and precise. It said, M. Just that. One letter. She set it back down on the shelf. She looked at the filing cabinets. She looked at the compounding bench and the analytical balance and the row of amber bottles and the mortar and pestle and the smell that was still there if you stood close enough. Ethanol and beeswax and dried peppermint, so faint it was almost a memory rather than a smell. She sat down on the bottom step. She did not open anything. Not yet. She sat on the bottom step for a long time. The fluorescent light ran its steady white across the room. The analytical balance sat behind its glass enclosure. The filing cabinets stood against the right wall in their industrial gray, labeled in her father's hand. The lockbox sat on the lower shelf of the workbench with its one letter, M. She had been a pharmacist for 34 years. She had learned in her first year of pharmacy school that the most dangerous thing in a lab was not the compounds. It was the assumption. The assumption that you already knew what something was before you had finished measuring it. Her professor had said it plainly. The label is a hypothesis. The contents are the truth. Never confuse the two. She stood up. She went to the first filing cabinet, 1984 to 1990. She put her hand on the drawer pull. She opened it. The files were organized by patient surname, alphabetical. The same system as upstairs, the same white tape labels, the same black marker. But these files were different from the prescription records kept above. Those had been standard pharmacy documentation: medication name, dosage, prescribing physician, fill date, patient signature. What her father kept in this cabinet was something else. Each file folder held two things. The first was a compounding record. Her father's handwriting, precise and small, recording the preparation of each compound, the formula, the components, the weight of each ingredient measured to the 4th decimal place, the date, the batch number. Standard lab documentation, the kind that would satisfy an audit. The second was something that had no standard form. It was a single sheet of paper, different for each patient, sometimes a half sheet, sometimes just an index card. Her father's handwriting again, but different from the compounding records, looser, the letters closer together, the way a person writes when they are writing for themselves rather than for a record. She pulled the first sheet from the first file. Calvin Acres. The date at the top was March 1984. The compound was a topical anti-inflammatory, a formulation she recognized, something that could be made inexpensively from components available in bulk, something that would have cost 3 times as much through a commercial supplier. Below the compound name, her father had written 4 lines. Calvin Acres, retired. Black lung claim pending since 1981. Wife, Doris. 3 daughters. Oldest starting community college in the fall. That was all. No dollar amount. No notation of payment or non-payment. Just those 4 lines. And below them, a small mark in the margin. A single horizontal line. The kind you make when something is settled. She put the sheet back. She pulled another. Harold Blevins, May 1984. A compound for hypertension. Below the formula, Harold Blevins, worked the high splint mine 31 years. Son Jimmy in 8th grade. Good student, his teacher says. She stood at the open cabinet and read for a long time. The files went through the alphabet twice before the drawer ended. She did not read every sheet. She read enough. Enough to understand that her father had been keeping these records for a reason that had nothing to do with audit compliance and everything to do with the specific, irreducible humanity of the people whose names were written on those index cards. He had not written their diagnoses. He had not written their income levels or their ability to pay. He had written what mattered to them, what they were carrying, what was waiting for them at home when they picked up their prescriptions and drove back out on 119. She closed the first drawer. She opened the second. 1991 to 1997. She found her own years there exactly as she had known she would. The files from the period when she had stood above this room at that counter, measuring compounds beside her father, not knowing. The same handwriting, The same index cards. She pulled one at random. Loretta Combs, February 1993. A compound for a child. Pediatric dosage. A specific formulation Margaret recognized as one she had prepared herself upstairs that winter. She remembered the name. She had not known about the index card. Loretta Combs, husband laid off consul, 3 kids under 10, youngest has the asthma bad this year. Margaret set the card down on top of the cabinet. She had made that compound. She had filled that prescription. She had handed it across the counter and collected whatever was owed. And not known that below her feet, in a room she did not know existed, her father had written down why. She pulled back from the cabinet. She needed a moment. She walked to the compounding bench and put both hands flat on the cold steel and stood there. The room was quiet. The dehumidifier ran upstairs, a faint mechanical sound through the floor. Outside, Cumberland Avenue was going through its Thursday morning in the way small towns go through mornings, slowly, without announcement. She breathed. Then she went back to the second drawer and kept reading. By the time she reached the end of the 4th cabinet, 2005 to 2007, the last years her father had been able to work the compounding bench himself, she had a number. 287. That was how many names were in those files. She had not counted as she went. She had counted afterward, standing at the last cabinet, doing the arithmetic the way her father would have done it, carefully, without rounding. 287 people in Harlan County who had received compounded medications from this room. Medications prepared below the floor of a building that looked from the outside like a closed pharmacy, a condemned building, a property assessed at $3,847.22. She did not know the total dollar value of what had been dispensed. She did not need to. She almost missed the envelope in the 3rd cabinet. It was at the back of the 1998 to 2004 drawer, behind the last file folder, lying flat against the back wall of the cabinet. A standard business envelope, white, sealed, her name on the front in her father's handwriting. Not M, her full name, Margaret Ann Hollis. The same handwriting that had labeled the lockbox, the same black marker, but the full name this time, the name he had used when something was important, when he needed her to understand that what he was saying was not shorthand, was not a label, was not a hypothesis, was the truth. She held it for a moment. She did not open it yet. She set it on the compounding bench. She picked up the lock box from the workbench shelf. She looked at the combination lock. She knew the combination before she tried it. She had known it since she saw the lock, in the way you know certain things about people you have spent your life beside. Her father used the same combination for everything that needed a combination. The year the pharmacy opened, 1971. She set the dials. She pressed the release. The lock opened. Inside the lockbox were 3 things. The first was a document, trust agreement, irrevocable, executed in 2003 before a notary in Harlan County. She read the first page, and then the second, and then she sat down on the bottom step again with the document in her hands and read the rest of it. Her father had been depositing money into a restricted account since 1987. Small amounts, regular, the way you deposit money when you have learned to live without it, automatically, before you can spend it, before you can talk yourself out of it. The amounts varied, some years more, some years less. The account had earned interest. The trust had been structured by an attorney in Harlan named Gerald Fitch, who had died in 2011, but whose firm was still in operation on the east end of Main Street. The total held in trust as of the last statement, dated 14 months before her father's death, was $241,600. The trust had one named beneficiary and one named purpose. The beneficiary was a mobile medical clinic for Harlan County and the surrounding region. The purpose was pharmaceutical services and compound preparation for patients without insurance coverage. The executor was Margaret Hollis. She sat on the step with the document in her hands. $241,600. She looked at the number. She looked at it the way she had looked at numbers her entire professional life, without flinching, without letting the size of it make her hands unsteady. She had learned that in pharmacy school, too. Numbers were numbers. What mattered was what they measured. What this number measured was 38 years of a man deciding every week that other people's prescriptions mattered more than whatever else that money could have been. If you've made it this far into Margaret's story, hit subscribe, because what I found next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. She set the trust document aside. She picked up the second item from the lockbox. It was a notebook, small, the kind sold at drugstores, with a black cardboard cover and a red spine. The pages were filled from front to back in her father's handwriting, smaller than his usual hand, as though he had been conserving space. She opened to the first page. The date at the top was April 14th, 1984. It began without preamble. Started the account today, $30. Felt like the right amount to start with. Calvin Akers came in this morning and I did the compound, and I wrote down what I know about his situation. And I thought about what it means to give a man his medication, and also give him the knowledge that someone knows what he's carrying. I don't think he needs to know that I know. I think he needs to feel that the transaction is clean, that he is not a case, that he walked in a man and walked out a man. I think that is worth $30 a week. She read the next entry, and the next. The entries were not daily, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes a single sentence, sometimes a page. Her father had not been keeping a diary in the way most people keep diaries, to record events, to process feeling. He had been keeping an account, not financial, something closer to a reckoning. She found the entry from February 1993. Made the compound for the Coombs child today, the asthma formulation. Margaret prepared it upstairs. Did not know the reason I had her make it. She has good hands. Better than mine now, I think. She measures everything to 4 decimal places without being asked. She does not round. She did not know I was watching. I was not watching. I was just working beside her, and I could see it. She is going to know how to do this right. She did not know, reading that sentence, what her father had meant by this. She would not know until the third item in the lockbox. She kept reading. The middle entries covered the years she had worked beside him. She found herself in them without warning, described without sentiment, in the plain, factual language her father used for everything he considered important. Margaret suggested the new hypertension formulation today. She is right. Better bioavailability, lower cost per dose. I have been using the old formula out of habit. She does not have habits yet. This is an advantage. She has not asked about the room downstairs. She will not ask. She has learned, the way good pharmacists learn, that some things are not her business until they are her business. And then, near the end, dated 6 months before the chain came through. The chain has made an offer. Derek called me, not Margaret. He called me directly and gave me the number and said it was the right thing to do. He is not wrong about the number. He is measuring the right thing the wrong way. I am going to accept the offer. There is no other realistic choice. The building will need work I cannot afford. My hands are not what they were. But the room stays, the account stays, the work stays. The only question is who I trust to pick it up. She closed the notebook. She held it against her chest, the way you hold something when you need a moment before you can put it down. Then she reached into the lockbox for the third item. It was a single folded sheet of paper, the same kind her father had used for the index cards in the filing cabinets, but a full sheet this time. She unfolded it. Her father's
Margaret,
handwriting, the
tests
same black
are
marker,
conclusive.
no date.
The
Margaret,
formulation is
you already understand
completely
why I could not
stable.
tell you about this directly. If I had told you, you would have told me to stop. You would have said it was too much, that I was taking on too much, that I should spend the money on myself, on my health, on the things that were failing. You would have been right about all of that. You also would have been wrong about what mattered most. The people who came to this counter, Calvin Akers, Harold Blevins, Loretta Combs and her youngest, all 287 of them. They did not come here to be helped. They came here because they needed medication and they had nowhere else to go. The difference between those two things is the whole thing. A man who knows he is being helped feels the weight of it every time he walks through the door. A man who is simply filling his prescription walks in a man and walks out a man. I kept this from you because you would have helped differently. You would have helped the way good people help, openly, warmly, with your whole self. And they would have felt it. And some of them would have stopped coming. You are better than me at almost everything we both know how to do. You are not better than me at this. Not yet. The trust is yours to use. The room is yours to use or not use. The files are yours to do with what you think is right. I have left you the account because you are the only person I have ever worked beside who understands that the dose is not the same as the medicine. There is a difference between what a person receives and what a person is able to accept. Figure out the rest yourself. You always have. Your father, Raymond Walter Hollis. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it. She held it for a moment. She set it on top of the notebook on the compounding bench. She looked at the filing cabinets. At the 287 files. At the compounding bench her father had built and kept clean for 23 years in a room that no one was supposed to find until the right person did. She looked at the lockbox, at the trust document with her name on the executor line, at the number that meant 38 years of $30 a week and everything else he had been able to add to it. She picked up the letter again. She did not read it again. She just held it. Derek called that afternoon. She let it ring. He called again an hour later. She was still in the room below the pharmacy, sitting at the compounding bench with the trust document and the notebook and the letter arranged in front of her. She looked at her phone when it rang. She watched the screen. She let it go to voicemail. He did not leave a message the first time. The second time he left 11 seconds of silence and then his voice, careful and measured, saying that the contractor in Lexington had asked about the timeline and he needed to know if she was still planning to be out of the building by end of week. She listened to the message once. Then she set the phone face down on the bench.
Blevins.
She picked up the trust document and read it again from the first page. She stayed in Harlan for 4 more days. She did not call Derek back. She called Gerald Fitch's firm on Friday morning and spoke to a woman named Patricia, who had been with the firm since 2004 and knew the trust documents without having to look them up. Patricia confirmed the account balance, confirmed Margaret's status as executor, confirmed that the trust had been structured to survive the sale of the building and was in no way contingent on Margaret's ownership of the property on Cumberland Avenue. The trust existed independent of the building. The work her father had done in that room could continue independent of the building.
On without her.
Margaret wrote that down on the back of a pharmacy receipt she found in her wallet. She wrote it in her father's style, plainly, without decoration, the way you write something you need to remember. Not because it is beautiful, but because it is true. She folded the receipt and put it in her coat pocket. On Saturday morning, she unlocked the building at 6:47. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the sign her father had painted in 1971. The letters were still straight. They had always been straight, even when everything around them was not. She put the keys in her coat pocket. On Sunday, she asked Cora Webb if there was somewhere in Harlan that still did a proper Sunday meal. Cora brought her to a church fellowship hall on the east side of town. It was not a church service, it was a meal, the kind of Sunday meal that small towns in eastern Kentucky have been doing for generations. A rotating potluck hosted by different families each week, open to anyone who showed up with a dish or without one. Cora had been coming for 11 years. She brought a pan of cornbread and did not announce herself, and found a seat at one of the long folding tables, and Margaret sat beside her. The room was loud in the way fellowship halls are loud. Not the loud of a crowd, but the loud of people who know each other well enough to talk over each other without offense. The overlapping sound of a community that has been doing this long enough to have its own rhythms. Margaret filled her plate. She sat. The woman across from her was in her late 60s, with white hair pinned up, and hands that had the same quality Margaret had noticed in her own hands. The hands of someone who had spent their working life doing precise things. The woman looked at her for a moment. "You're Raymond's girl," she said. "Margaret," Margaret said. The woman nodded. "Vera Akers. My husband Calvin used Hollis Pharmacy from 1984 until your father closed." She picked up her fork. "Calvin passed in 2014, but he talked about your father until the end. Said Raymond Hollis was a fair man." She paused. "Said he never felt like a charity case. Said that was rare." She said it plainly, and then she ate and did not make more of it than it was. Margaret looked at her plate. Down the table, an older man had turned at the sound of the name. He was in his 70s, broad through the shoulders, the kind of frame that had once been powerful and was now simply solid. "You're Margaret Hollis," he said, not a question. "Yes." "Jimmy Blevins." He leaned across the table slightly. "My father was Harold Blevins." She knew the name from the second file in the first cabinet. May 1984. Harold Blevins. Worked the high splint mine 31 years. Son Jimmy in 8th grade. Good student, his teacher says. "I know your father's name," she said. Jimmy Blevins looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. The look of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just been told, without words, that someone else knows the weight of it. "I didn't know until after he passed," Jimmy said. "Found the receipts in his papers. 0 balance, every one. Going back to 1984. He looked down at his plate. "I thought it was a bookkeeping error at first. Then I found too many of them." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought about coming to the pharmacy and asking." But by the time I
being
found the
payments.
receipts, the pharmacy had been closed 2 years already. He picked up his fork. I never knew who to thank. I just never knew. Margaret looked at him. My father knew your father's name, she said. He wrote it down. Jimmy Blevins looked up. She did not say anything more than that. She did not explain the files, or the room, or the notebook. She just let the sentence be what it was, the smallest possible piece of the truth, enough to let a man know that his father had been seen, that the weight he had been carrying had been known by someone, that the zero on those receipts
We
had
will
not been
figure
an
this
accident,
out
or an
together.
oversight, or a gift given carelessly. Jimmy Blevins nodded once. He went back to his food. After the meal, a woman found Margaret near the door. She was in her early 60s, slim, with the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of standing upright in difficult circumstances. She introduced herself as Carol Simmons, the name Margaret recognized from Cora's story 2 days earlier, the name that had made her set down her sandwich. Cora told me you were in town, Carol said. I hope that's all right. It's all right, Margaret said. Carol looked at her for a moment. My husband Bobby used the pharmacy until he passed, 2009. She straightened the strap of her bag on her shoulder. I always meant to say something to your father. After Bobby died, I kept meaning to go in and just say something. Tell him what it meant. She paused. But every time I got to the door, I couldn't figure out what to say that wouldn't embarrass him. He never made it feel like charity. I didn't want to make it feel like charity by thanking him for it. She stopped. She looked at the floor and then back up. I thought about it for a long time, she said. I still don't know if I got that right. Margaret looked at her. You got it right, she said. Carol Simmons held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. She said it was good to meet her. She said she was glad someone had come to open the building up again. She did not ask what Margaret was planning to do with it. She just said that, and then she moved toward the door, and Margaret watched her go. She left Harlan on Monday morning. She locked the building on Cumberland Avenue at 6:47 in the morning. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the sign her father had painted in 1971.
We found
The
it.
letters were still
It's
straight.
exactly
They
where
had
he
always
said it
been
would
straight,
be.
even when everything around them was not. She put the
I
keys
know
in her
what
coat
my
pocket.
father was hiding.
She drove north on 119,
I understand
same
the
way she had
legacy
come.
he left
The hills
behind.
close on both sides.
And I am not
the creek
afraid to
appearing
use
and
it.
disappearing below the road. She stopped at the same gas station outside Baxter. The same young man was behind the counter. He looked at her keys when she set them on the counter. He looked at the Hollis pharmacy tag. He did not say anything this time. He poured the coffee.
Exactly
He set it on the counter.
$3 million.
He went back to what he had been doing. She left $2. She drove. Derek called while she was on 75 north of Corbin. She answered.
I need
He asked
you
about
to
the contractor
stay
timeline. He asked if she had finished clearing the building.
focused, Margaret.
His voice was the same as it always was,
Keep
careful,
driving
measured.
and
The voice of a
do
man
not
who had learned to
look
keep
back.
things level, because level was safer than the alternative. There are some things in the building I need to go through, she said. A pause. What kind of things? Files, equipment. She kept her eyes on the road. There's a trust. Your grandfather set up a trust. I'm the executor. Another pause, longer. A trust, Derek said. Yes. She heard him breathe. She heard him doing what he always did when a number appeared that he had not accounted for. Recalibrating, adjusting, running the new information through the same set of calculations he ran everything through. How much? He said. She told him.
I have
He was
considered
quiet for a
every
long time.
possible outcome.
Long enough that she checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. It was. "Mom," he said finally. She waited. "I didn't know," he said. That was all. I didn't know. He said it the way a person says a true thing when they have just understood that the true thing does not make them right. She did not say that she knew he hadn't known. She did not say it was all right. She did not say anything that would let him off the hook or put him further on it. She let the silence be what it was, the space between a man's understanding and whatever he was going to do with it. "The building on Cumberland Avenue," she said after a while. "I need to talk to
Margaret,
Patricia Fitch
the test
about whether the
result came
trust can
back.
be used for
They
renovation.
show some complications.
Derek
we
said
didn't
he would look
expect.
into the remediation costs.
We need you to come in
She said that
tomorrow
would be
morning.
fine. They drove the rest of the way in silence, which was not silence at all, but something more like the sound of two people learning to be in the same place again after a long time of being in different ones. She called Patricia Fitch from the parking lot of her apartment building in Lexington. Patricia said the trust documents were broad enough to cover renovation of a facility used for the trust's stated purpose. She said she would need to review the current structure of the building assessment. She said she could have something to Margaret by end of week. Margaret thanked her and hung up. She sat in the car. The parking lot was ordinary, the kind of parking lot that exists in 10,000 places in America. Asphalt, painted lines, a row of dumpsters along the far wall, a single tree in a concrete cutout near the entrance that had somehow survived its conditions and was showing the first green of the year at the tips of its branches. She thought about her father standing at that compounding bench in the room below the building on Cumberland Avenue. Standing at that bench in the years before she came back from Lexington, and in the years when she was upstairs not knowing, and in the years after she left, when his hands were going and the chain had bought the inventory and the lights had gone out on Cumberland Avenue, while Cora Webb watched from across the street. She thought about what he had written. There is a difference between what a person receives and what a person is able to accept. She had been thinking about that sentence for 4 days. She had turned it over the way she turned compounds over in her mind when she was working out a formulation, looking at each component, testing the structure, asking what it was actually made of. What her father had understood, what he had understood in a way she was only beginning to understand now, was that the hardest part of helping was not the giving. The hardest part was the giving in a form the other person could accept without losing themselves in the acceptance. He had spent 38 years working that problem. He had never solved it perfectly. No one could solve it perfectly. But he had built a room under a pharmacy in a coal town in eastern Kentucky, and he had gone down those stairs, and he had measured things to the 4th decimal place, and he had written down the names of the people and what they were carrying, and he had not told a single one of them what he was doing, because telling them would have changed what they received. A pharmacist measures everything. Raymond Hollis had measured everything he could measure: the dose, the interval, the risk, the weight of what people could carry and what they couldn't, the difference between a transaction that leaves a man whole and one that leaves him owing. What he had never measured, what could not be measured, what he had understood could not be measured and had stopped trying, was the kindness itself. He had just kept dispensing it, in the right doses to the right people at the right intervals, for 38 years, until there was nothing left in him to dispense. And then he had left the room to the one person he trusted to understand why the measurements mattered less than the medicine. She got out of the car. She went inside. She put her keys on the table by the door. She took the folded pharmacy receipt from her coat pocket and set it on the counter, the one where she had written, in her father's plain style, that the trust existed independent of the building. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to make coffee. There was work to do, and she was going to do it, and the morning was already moving, and she had learned from the man who had taught her everything she knew about measuring things, that the most important compounds were the ones you made without stopping to name what you were making. You just kept working. That was how it got done. A pharmacist measures everything: the dose, the interval, the risk. What Raymond Hollis measured most carefully, more carefully than anything else in 38 years, was the distance between what a person receives and what a person is able to accept. He never found a formula for it. He just kept compounding. Quietly, precisely. In a room no one was supposed to find until someone was ready to understand what it meant. Margaret Hollis was ready. If this story stayed with you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for a new story every week, and leave a comment. Is there someone in your life whose love you didn't fully understand until it was too late to tell them?